Hello, good afternoon. I'm going to keep the beard trend going for this session. So, and yeah, do you guys see this comet landing just happened about 2 hours ago? As long as we're talking about prototyping the future, the European Space Agency sent up the Rosetta mission about 10 years ago, and it caught up to this comet that's outside of the solar system and followed it for a while, and it's not round, it's shaped like a rubber ducky, apparently, and flipping like this, and they had to land on it. And they just did about 2 hours ago and drilled in some supports, and they're going to study it. But that's happening right now outside of our solar system. So as long as we're talking about the future, I just thought I'd give a shout out to that. That took some foresight 10 years ago. Yeah, how about those crazy people? And so right now, here, we're talking about prototyping the future. So yeah, I'm a co-founder of freespace. There's a number of other freespace co-founders and freespace cadets in the room as well. And this is a really, nice, informal and, communal feeling. And I really enjoy creating that in anything that I'm a part of. And that seems the best way to move forward. So I just put these slides together basically out of images that were on my iPhone. And happens to be a lot of people who are in the room who I didn't even know would be here in the slides. You can almost do like a bingo of who's going to appear. But so I'm also an affiliate at the Institute for the Future. It's a Palo Alto-based think tank that started around the dawn of the internet. And they follow signals. They look for single instances of things that will become more prevalent in the future. And I don't consider myself a futurist. I like to consider myself a nowist. I like to kind of imagine, prototype, and then implement things. And I work on a lot of different projects. Those are the ones I could think of for today. And I call myself a culture hacker. And culture is the manifestation of a collective human intellect. And that's really what shapes our worldview. And hacking is about deconstructing, reimagining, and kind of taking that apart and figuring out ways that can work for everybody. And so, I think that the term prototype is about creating a model. But what good is a model unless you can scale it? And our first surprise guest on the stage, on the screen, is Marco Cochran, who's a talented sculptor. And first, he creates, models. I don't know, this big, this somewhere. Oh, he's embarrassed. But it starts with a smaller model. But then, just like the other definition of culture in kind of the biological sense, a petri dish, you need to have the right conditions to be able to scale that, whether it be technology or warmth or whatever it is. And so for prototypes to be able to scale and be able to create these massive, monumental, inspiring things. And this is a sculpture which is actually going to be coming to San Leandro at the BART station that will be living here for 10 years. So just wanted to use that analogy to frame this talk on it's important to prototype and rapid prototyping, but it's also important to have the conditions by which those prototypes can scale. So that's a ugly spit. A little bit about me. I've had the benefit of living in the Bay Area for about 10 years now. Met a lot of amazing people, seen a lot of amazing things with the sustainability movement, sharing economy, the maker movement. And I originally moved here to do green building. We're doing private homes, but that kind of was leaving a little bit of the ordinary person out of it. So I helped start an environmental nightclub where we were using culture to bring people in and to experience sustainability in a way that wasn't guilt-ridden and more expensive, but cool and sexy and fun. We had an energy-generating dance floor, we had rooftop beehives, and beyond the waterless urinals and the LED lights, we started to offer our space when we weren't using it on Sunday through Wednesday for free for groups that were doing, conscious things. And that really became a way to start to witness trends. When you remove money from the equation, you get to see what people are truly passionate about. And through that, I was sent to Uganda and showed the World Cup on a big inflatable projector screen for free. And that was, again, using culture to get people to show up. And at halftime, we'd say, what should we do together? What are some challenges? What can we solve? This was kind of a civic hacking project. And I came with an environmental bias and what I wanted to do. And plastic is ubiquitous. But what wound up coming up and surfacing was road safety. There was a highway that was put in that was killing 1 to 2 children a week. And we wound up just getting a child crossing sign and doing a huge protest and putting in place. Rasta Rani has been our crossing guard. And since he's been working, there have been no fatalities during his shifts during the morning and the evening. He was hit once, but he's okay. And it's been, it was that kind of opened my eyes to, hey, just let the community decide what should happen. Wound up doing some more work in Haiti after that. And that's when I really started to see that disaster zones and depressed urban environment or economically depressed urban environments and temporary areas were the best area, the most kind of, I would say the conditions for prototyping and trying things out were those type of environments. Because what's currently there isn't working. So these hackathons became a thing a couple of years ago. All of a sudden I was attending, double booked on weekends. Did one on an airplane that went to London. We did one on a train journey across the country. Organized another one for Yurtle, which is a sharing economy company. It was the Surf a Hack-a-Share-a-thon. And they actually just announced yesterday that they were funded by Patagonia, started a VC firm. So that was kind of fun. And wanted to mention this one particular hackathon. This was one that was in Palo Alto called Super Happy Block Party. It was thrown by the city, the Institute for the Future, and Innovation Endeavors. And they brought together, they didn't call it a hackathon, they called it Super Happy Block Party. Because that's really what it's about, community coming together. They say artists and activists. And it was sponsored by and funded by Eric Schmidt, who brought the idea to the White House and said, hey, this was this great turnout. We had balloons, and Artist Mobilist was actually there. And they said, hey, why don't we try and do a coordinated nationwide hackathon? So the National Day of Civic Hacking was born. So a group of us in San Francisco came together, and a bunch of them are here in the audience, and we decided that we were going to participate in this, but instead of doing one day, we decided we were going to hack the hackathon and declare June last year National Month of Civic Hacking. And we wanted to create a physical space for that to be able to take shape. And this is a building on Soma. It's 14,000 square feet. The owner wanted $24,000 a month. But we were able, through some tricky negotiations, to convince him it'd be good for the neighborhood, and we got it just for $1. And we had a home. Then, yeah, that was a good victory. Then we needed a logo, and this is Micah Daigle, another participant, it's just 2 brackets. And he came back after about 2 hours and said, hey, I know it's simple, but this is what we have, and it really was perfect. And that's all we wanted to do, is not command what would happen inside, but give people space and permission to create inside. And FreeSpace was born. And it was this whole experiment of, there was nothing in the building, we didn't have anything. People gave us their trucks. And this is, Ian Ross painted the truck, and he was gonna paint free truck on it, but we thought people would steal it. That one always gets a little laugh. And then we also took this kind of ugly facade, and in just a couple days transformed it into this beautiful mural and took over the parking lot next door and started to fill things and really kind of threw the gauntlet down of here's what we've done on the outside of the building. What are you going to do inside? So we started having meetings and decided what are we going to do? How are we going to decide what happens there? And this is a really important piece, the governance. And we decided there's a lot of different governance models out there. There's the duocracy, there's the meritocracy, the holocracy. We decided to go with the adhocracy, and and we drafted some principles, and basically the only rule was that no money was allowed inside. No one could sell anything. They couldn't sell tickets, and it had to be inclusive. And then we had a number of principles as well that kind of we thought would help facilitate collaboration and participation in the space. And in just the first 11 days, we transformed this kind of blank, empty building into this really beautiful, vibrant space with a slide and LED light installations and sound systems and projectors and chairs and couches. We didn't purchase anything except for I think toilet paper. And more people started to come, and we allowed people to do events. We started hacking on old cars and doing yoga classes, and we wound up doing 119 events in just our first 30 days. And I think that speaks to the notion of user-generated physical space. Just like platforms like Facebook and YouTube and Twitter, all these things, they're just providing the opportunity for people to create. We threw our opening party and our closing party. But we also started getting kids to show up, and homeless people, and MIT rocket scientists. And that was really what we wanted to do, was create a space that is inclusive and diverse, because in order for the most equitable solutions to come out, you really need everybody's opinion. This is a park cycle. It's a moving lawn. You can pedal around, and it has solar power for the brake lights. And we'd start taking our message kind of out into the city, and this was a Burning Man hack we did, and took these jellyfish around. And really just kind of playing in the city. And we really, play is an important component of, getting participation and civic engagement. We also worked on projects. This is Free Space fellow Mark Roth, who was formerly homeless, and the press, who's actually here right now, dubbed him as homeless to hacker, because he took classes at Tech Shop that Delisha mentioned earlier, and became the CEO now of a successful laser cutting business. And he stood up on stage and said, "This is my story, but I want to help other people do this as well, but I don't know how." And he had an idea of the Learning Shelter, which was basically to combine Tech Shop with the homeless shelter. And we organized a hackathon for him, came up with the logo, helped develop a curriculum, and we just finished our first prototype where we had 4 people living together, eating together, and working at Tech Shop for 3 months. The first month was instruction, the second 2 months was prototyping. And it was even mentioned by Obama at the White House Maker Faire. The project and him were mentioned by name. And it was, again, a place for someone to stand up and say, "I have this idea, but I don't know how to make it happen. Can you help?" So yeah, lots of projects, and you see our sound system, and making a flag. We got shipping containers donated from eco-villages, and they were painted by artists. We got 3D printers donated from 3D Systems. And this was a term that Marina Gorbis used at the Skull World Forum about free space called social structing. I think that's how you pronounce it. That all these little things add up into a big thing that creates a lot of value. Even though it didn't have financial input necessarily, like it was always free for everybody and no one was selling anything there was still a great amount of value created. We also got written up on the cover of the Chronicle by Nellie, who's here, with the title, "Work plus Play equals Free Space," which we really appreciated. And that kind of helped spread the message to other people in the city to show up, but also elsewhere. And we were invited to the White House. This was part of the National Day of Civic Hacking. We were one of the groups invited to a Champions for Change event to be able to share how this is a method of civic engagement that doesn't involve protesting, voting, or running for civil office. It's a kind of a new form of how we can be involved in our cities. And yeah, it was fun. We got to hang out in DC for a little. And when we returned back to San Francisco, it was only supposed to go for 30 days, but the community rallied together and said 30 days isn't enough. So we wound up doing a crowdfunding campaign and raising money to continue in the space for another 5 months. And the surprising thing that happened was people from all over the world started contacting us and saying, "How do we do a free space in our community?" And we had really only intended this to be a 30-day experiment. So that was very exciting, and we wound up doing a second space in San Francisco. We got a grant from the Mayor's Office of Economic and Workforce Development and the Art Commission, and we wound up doing a second space in San Francisco. And this is another friend who's in the audience from Barcelona, trend forecaster Libby. This is at the school where she works. It said, "Don't worry about people stealing your design work, worry about the day they stop." And I think that really speaks to the whole open source movement. If someone's copying it and they took your idea, come up with something else. That's going to push innovation much further. So instead of saying, "Oh, this is our idea," or anything, which we wouldn't have done anyway, but it was really exciting. And in our first year alone, we wound up opening 9 different spaces all over the world. We did San Francisco, Detroit, Brooklyn, Paris, Rhein-Neckar in Germany, Tacloban, Philippines, Uganda, and Kenya. And then there were also several other communities that hadn't figured out a space but were able to do events, such as Austin and Dammam, Saudi Arabia. 3 graphic designers in Dammam, Saudi Arabia. And they were all different. That's the kind of great thing about providing the canvas and letting people play with it. Paris was much more cultural. They wound up doing a fashion hack during Fashion Week, where it started with a clothing swap, and then they moved those clothes onto the runway, and it was all free. Anyone could be a model. Anyone could be a designer. But Detroit was very different. This is a dragon that was made in Detroit, not for Burning Man. It was made for Detroit, called Gone Karen. And my first day in Detroit, I wound up riding to the bars in the Skull that is on hydraulics. And I have a little video. It's a little crude, but I'm going to show it to you in the volume. This is what it's like. Oh, and it did go to Burning Man, actually. But this is riding around at 2 in the morning in Detroit, just to give you an idea of what is possible there.
Bitches, stop for the dragon. Bitches, don't. The guy that we had to like tow to get his spot, like his parking spot. He comes out before the truck. He's like, I'm like, bitch, you're not for the dragon.
We're literally driving through red lights, shooting fire at the lights while other cars are coming.
Only in Detroit will you ever ride on a goddamn fucking dragon.
And no cop saw us. They've taken it out before, and the firemen stopped them. They're like, uh-oh. And the firemen showed up and like, this thing's awesome. They have other things to worry about. So, and there's tons of rune porn. I'm not going to show lots of that to you. Go see it for yourself. It's really fascinating. There's schools, hospitals, water treatment facilities, all sorts of things that are just completely abandoned. But there's also tons of creative output. And, that's what exploring there came across this space as well. It's the Department of Alternatives. They work with kind of things that have failed. The buses there's barely any buses there. So a guy who was working out of there started the Detroit Bus Company that now takes something like, I don't know, thousands of kids to after-school programs. He just bought school buses and painted them. And they offered us space inside of their co-working space for free space to live. And I met Justin Wiebes. He was a Zuccotti Park organizer. He actually set up the Occupy social media account. But we had a talk to say, this is like, respect to what you guys did with Occupy, but free space has a different mentality. First of all, we're not against anything. We're only for things. We don't use consensus. And we respect our landlords, our space. And he was kind of ready to go with this. And he gave it a shot. He's a very talented activist. He actually has been kind of demonized a little by the Occupy community now. They call him the Wolf of Occupy Wall Street. But he's very effective. He actually was I guess this is Zuccotti Park here, and they have conditions now. And I guess this is, again, the point that if you're against something, you give people a reason to be against you. And, I think a lot of times we're working forward, or a lot of our energies are, not really moving us forward. They can be, put back on us. And, just a slight change in, gesture really has a great different meaning and opportunities that can come out of them. I was also in New York recently for the 400,000 person climate march, and it was the same weekend as the New York Maker Faire. And I have to say, I was more inspired and made more optimistic by the Maker Faire, seeing people progressively or proactively creating the future that they want instead of, I'm not against this. This was great. This was, impressive to see. It's important. But I just think that, taking matters into your own hand, not waiting until the people in power give you control of or change their minds and saying you don't have the ability to act until them is kind of self-defeating. So we had a meeting about water. We sat down in Detroit and said, what should we work on? This was our first day, and the water shutoffs became the major issue. They said up to 40% of Detroiters were behind on their music. This is behind on their water bills. There's moms, this is elderly, sick, and they decided to tackle this issue, and instead of being against, they were for. And they used tactics from Occupy Sandy, where they set up an Amazon wedding registry, and were able to get about $30,000 of in-kind donations. And they used free space as their logistics, distribution spot for press conferences and everything. This was a group that didn't exist, but because they had the opportunity to have a free space, they didn't have the ability to pay rent or anything. They were able to grow into this really successful organization that's got a ton of media coverage, really got the idea of, or the notion, the fact that the water shutoffs were happening into kind of the global consciousness. And they petitioned the UNHCR to get a human rights violation declared against the United States for the first time ever, declaring water a human right. And they were just for things. And we've actually purchased land now in Detroit that we're looking, these 11 properties for $3,300 that we're looking to turn into a public land trust that can be for 100 or 200 years if we can get it, that will be run by the community, owned by the community. I have way more slides, and I'm almost done. So I'm going to skip through some of this. But I think, these examples of areas where things have kind of fallen apart The democracy doesn't exist there anymore. They have the bankruptcy. They have an emergency financial manager who has control over, the mayor, legislation, everything. And I think there's like 80% of even people that do have jobs in the rest of the country aren't really happy with what they're doing. As you mentioned earlier, that's okay because machines are going to replace a lot of those. But, and there's 86% of people are not satisfied with Congress. Catalonia just voted to remove themselves from the rest of Spain, but there's all these, so there's a lot of discontent out there. And I think it's really important that, again, we don't just wait until things happen. So here's a magazine we found while exploring one of the abandoned places. This is 1967. They're talking about this imaginary vehicle which employs an electric motor for the hybrid car. And I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that there are tons of models, there are tons of prototypes out there. We know about renewable energy. That the models already exist. It's about having the conditions by which they can flourish. And I think a big piece of that is really going to be about, that one did well, is going to be, this was a study that just came out by Princeton in April, but it just started making the rounds, that it concluded America's no longer a democracy. I mean, that's kind of frightening. I think it's time that we need to prototype not just things and making things, but also our governance structure, how we make decisions together, how we get our collective will to be honored. And there's democratic leaders, there's some new parties emerging. I've been exploring these physical spaces. This is the catacombs in Paris. I'm a cataphile now, a lover of the catacombs. They have 400 kilometers of tunnels under the city that you can go exploring and find incredible creations. The whole thing's illegal, but there are still rules that govern them. Kind of like street art, there's still respect involved. And the other place I'm absolutely in love with is Christiania. It's a temporary autonomous zone located in Copenhagen. They run a consensus democracy there. It's not even temporary anymore. It's actually 43 years old now. But yeah, these physical spaces are still out there. There's vacant spaces. There's opportunities for us to come together and build these things in this new paradigm that's about open source and getting together, mass collaboration, and making things happen that aren't part of the old structure. And there's these different campaigns that have happened. I'm curious what's going to be next. Is it twerking or the bucket challenge, or can we do better? And I just think that standing here in this building that is ground zero potentially for a brighter future of energy use inside of the built environment, and the two kind of pieces I really see as crucial are being able to be connected, which the ultra high bandwidth stuff provides, which really excited to see what emerges out of that, and access to space. And that's something that San Leandro really has going for it. So it's going to be fun to prototype the future together, play in it, and I look forward to doing it together with all of you. Thank you very much.